Hello, everyone. Well, I was asked to talk about creativity, and I was only given like 8 to 10 minutes to do that, and I can get a little long-winded when it comes to talking about food, where I could just be discussing salt with you, because the amazing creativity in just salt opens up a world of possibilities as a cook. And I wrote some notes about the nature of creativity from a culinary side, but also on some universals. One of those being, for me, creativity is not a discussion in a professional kitchen unless you first have your craft. And understanding the language of a kitchen, the methods, the techniques, a constant learning of ingredients, you create chaos. For example, as a boy, making sauces at home, and I cooked as early as I can remember, I would see that McCormick spice rack in my mom's kitchen and make these sauces with every single spice. And I would end up with brown gravy. Everything turns into brown gravy if you keep adding things to it. And I was the only one who would eat it. And it was more out of a sense of pride than it was out of any real flavor value. And so one of those things I've learned as a cook, as a chef, is to not add ingredients. And one of the first steps in how I think through the whole process of food is first, I'm hungry, right? I can only cook what I want to eat. So people ask me, what do you like on the menu? I said, well, I like all of it, because I wouldn't put it on the menu unless I actually had an appetite for it. But it starts with that ingredient. And if you delve into the world of ingredients, like I just mentioned with salt, and we'll carry anywhere from 8 to 12 different salts in the kitchen at any given time. One of my first jobs in a culinary kitchen was drying sea salt and grinding it for different stations. An ultra-fine grind for vegetables for quick dissolving and reaction, a coarser grind for meat, and sort of a medium grind for fish. And it was a lot about the dissolving qualities and the minerality of that salt. So you take something like baby carrots, or just take the world of cucumbers. Now, in the language of food, that could be 24 different varieties. Or, for example, tomatoes last year, we had one farmer who grew 220 varieties of tomatoes. So you can understand sort of the amazing amount of, I guess from a painting standpoint, colors you have to play with. So if I was going to cook you a tomato dish in August, I could just do variations of tomatoes, 17 different ways with 17 different tomatoes, all on one plate, trying to create a sort of singular theme within that. And so we look at that ingredient as inspiration. That's the what of the ingredient. I also look, of course, at the when. I think a lot about our food, especially how I cook, must have a sense of time and place. In the world of wine, that would be terroir, in vintages. And with food, I have the same drive. As an Atlanta native, I'm very concerned with what is Atlanta, Georgia cuisine. Specifically, in the neighborhoods I grew up in, and the movement of peoples throughout the South, and the history of the movement of those peoples. So, for me to discuss creativity is a history lesson in where we've come from. It's looking at the gifts from Africa that have come to define how we think about our foodways. It's white flint Sea Island grits, not just something you would see in a grocery store, but a grit that has an amazing amount of flavor and texture, a freshness, a cold milling. Again, we dive right into the ingredients that sort of came together to create Southern cuisine. And if we look at why are French chefs so emulated, what made them so special, and a lot of it was they took the foods they grew up with, the references from their own palate and their grandparents, and they fussied it up a little bit and put it on French china, and they served fermented grape juice in German crystal, and they got very pretentious with their service. And you had haute cuisine with all the finery. Now, I was talking to my cooks just yesterday about there is no noble food product in the sense that one has nobility over another, right? We use black truffles and foie gras and lobster. Many times in the history of these items, they've been unprized, like lobsters, ground into fertilizer. Truffles are just little protuberances that grow on roots. Liver, all the world of parts. That's a peasant cuisine and a culture of farms and dirt and unrefrigeration. It's a hard-working culture that was raised, of course, into aristocracy. So for me, I wrote an example of a dish that I love, which is what I consider putting Atlanta, Georgia, and Georgia on a plate, which is pork belly glazed with sorghum, which is a syrup from the Appalachians, served with wild dandelion greens, preserved garlic that comes from one farm that raises 9 varieties of garlic for us. We only get that garlic 1 month out of the year, so we have to preserve it to have garlic the rest of the year. We serve it with a grit foam, where we just charge grits into a soda canister, so we get this nice, fluffy, soft texture. And now all of those elements are Georgia cuisine. So if I say something like pork belly with sorghum, grits, and dandelion greens, you're going to think, well, I'll pay $4 for that. It'll meet in 3, right? But if I said that in French, I could charge $75 for that. So when I look at creativity again, I look at the culture of who I am. And so it has to begin, again, with looking internally on who I am and trusting that the appetites I have are shared by a large number of people. I'll have people who will eat that dish and say, well, this isn't Southern cuisine, or this isn't Southern food, just because it doesn't fit into a picture of how they see it, whether it's fried chicken with greens and coleslaw. If you break it out and just plate it with a little finesse, you help elevate it. You draw focus to your farmers, to the nature of who you are as a chef. And I think for me, the more I cook, the more I realize I want to have a distinctive voice cooking. In a sense, the older I get in this business, the more disinterested I become in how other chefs are looking at our food. And I realize the wealth of information just in my family and just in the culture of everyone who came to create our Southern cultural cuisine is endless. In a sense, with seasonality, there's no way to cook everything I want to cook in a lifetime. So I look at things like English peas. Well, in Georgia, the best English peas, I got about a month a year where I'm actually cooking with English peas. Haven't found a great preservation process for them. And if I change the menu, and I change it every night, say during that month I play around with 12 different recipes for English peas. So I'm thinking in a lifetime I've got maybe 200 more recipes in me for English peas. And so you start seeing how finite that vast world of ingredients can be. And so what we'll do, even at my other restaurant, Holman and Finch, sometimes, is I'll look at how do we define our cuisine with our fats. Waverly Root wrote a book about the foods of France, where he divided France into categories based on their fat. And so I sort of looked at the same way with Holman and Finch. So I got rid of olive oil. I said, we're going to challenge ourselves. Tomato season comes along. Everyone thinks olive oil, basil. I mean, how many people order caprese salads? I hope not here in January and February, because if the government is going to get involved in our food, that should be banned against the law. And so I try to challenge myself by removing ingredients. And seasonality helps me do that. It helps me frame what's going to go onto a menu, because like the previous speakers were saying, I've got a deadline at 5:30 every night 7 nights a week. Actually, that deadline's a little earlier so that I don't drive my cooks crazy with changing things on them as often as I do. It's really why I don't have tattoos or bumper stickers on my car, because I would change my mind so quickly and become immediately disgusted with what I had just done. And it's the same thing with a menu. I'll go read old menus, or I'll write copious notes when I'm out and actually not in a kitchen, but I seem to never go back to them as a reference point, because the moment I stand in this kitchen and with this team of young culinary professionals to create what is going to go on that plate that night, I sort of have to have that of the moment experience. And that's why sometimes we'll try to find a dish. I look at it as we've got these ingredients and we'll just start plating it, and actually over the course of an evening, you will see a different structure of that plate go out. So that pork belly dish may not look the same for every guest that orders it for that evening. And that may go on actually for 2 or 3 days, and I may just chuck it and not be happy with it. But it's a continual process, and the march of service always goes on and drives me to have that ready, to try to have some advanced preparation. But if you're tied into the seasonality and the small availability that comes from our local farms to create a framework for how you cook, then you realize someone will say, Linton, I need a menu for November. I'll say, November? You know, I can't know what I'm going to cook in November. I can tell you that there will probably be a protein on the plate and some vegetables. So I learned that my menus that require a lot of lead time, I'm building up sort of a past history where I can have some idea what will be on there, but I can't really tell you because sometimes those turnips may not show up. And it may be, instead of Hackeri turnips, it may be purple top turnips. Or instead of turnips, it may be rutabagas. Another name is golden turnips. Creatively, we can get crazy with a menu. Like you wouldn't really order Patagonia toothfish, or maybe you would, but the nomenclature is now Chilean sea bass. It's not a member of the bass family at all. So there's a lot of playing in just how you name something, and that's why I don't try to use foreign words for the foods I have, because I love saying pork belly or brains, right, or testicles. These are things that a lot of people think don't sell, and I've learned and gotten more confident as a cook that I'm not as concerned anymore with what sells. I'm really trying to internalize and become trusting in who I am as a cook and how good food tastes. In a sense, there's quite a nonsense line designating certain muscles in an animal from others. If you think about it, if you're a carnivore, there is no differentiation. I mean, what is sausage, really? Parts is parts. So the whole animal, if you do eat meat, is available. In a sense, this goes in another aspect of how we select our foods, is there has to be an ethical component. There has to be a trust, a sustainability to how we bring products to the market. And so that's why we use all the parts. Just to finish up, I just drove back from Savannah this past week and stopped in Dublin, Georgia, and went to the Piggly Wiggly, which I consider a great touchstone for me of how people eat. And you go look at the potted meat sections, or the meat sections in these grocery stores if you drive around the South, and you see things, cans, brains with milk sauce. Not only pickled pig's feet and pickled eggs, right? Chitterling loaf, right? Of course I brought it home and we fried it up immediately at the restaurant because I'll bring chitlins in. That's just intestine, and that's sausage casing, and that's good food. So again, I think I'm running past my time, but you can see how endless the culinary discussion can be from a creative side. And if you don't have those tools and craftsmanship to be able to communicate that way, you'll end up with that sort of muddy brown sauce that no one wants to eat. So thank you.